He lived in a town built to entertain the country, and then quietly took the town apart and put it back together so it always paid him first. This is the real story of Enoch Lewis "Nucky" Johnson, the man who ran Atlantic City with paperwork in one hand and a ledger of favors in the other. He did not look like a gangster from a dime novel. He looked like the kind of small-town official who could make or break a business license, a career, or a judge's patience. That ordinary face hid a very organized system for making vice profitable and politically safe in the era of Prohibition. Enoch Johnson was born in 1883 into a county family with local influence and an instinct for public order. His father served as sheriff, and young Enoch learned the mechanics of local government early. By 1908, he had been elected sheriff of Atlantic County. He moved with the rhythms of county politics. He became Atlantic County Treasurer and then Secretary of the Republican County Committee, positions that gave him daily access to names, numbers, and votes. He was inside the machine that ran patronage, dispersed municipal jobs, and decided which businesses stayed open and which did not. Those administrative powers would prove to be the currency he used to shape the city for 3 decades. Atlantic City at the turn of the century was no polite seaside town. It was a resort whose entire economy depended on creating pleasures that lawmakers elsewhere frowned on. The local leadership, including Johnson, treated that tension pragmatically. If tourists wanted alcohol, gambling, or brothels, the city could provide them, and they would bring money. Johnson's approach was less about violent turf wars and more about extracting steady revenue. He did not usually run the illegal operations himself. Instead, he built a system where those who ran vice paid the machine a cut. He protected the operators, controlled the police, and kept the courts and local officials aligned. That arrangement allowed the boardwalk and its businesses to operate openly enough that Atlantic City could brand itself as a destination where visitors got what they wanted. Prohibition changed the scale and stakes of that bargain. The national ban on alcohol turned ordinary resorts into major nodes in a black market. Johnson's Atlantic City became one of the most important ports for importing and distributing liquor along the eastern seaboard. He used the same tools he always had. Licensing, police appointments, and political favors were converted into a system for regulating who sold what, where, and at what cost to the machine. Instead of directly running bootlegging operations, Johnson took percentages, levied protection fees, and brokered arrangements among suppliers, distributors, and local racketeers. That made his income both prolific and, in many senses, predictable. It also made the city more resilient during Prohibition because the vice economy was integrated into the official functioning of Atlantic City rather than merely tolerated on its margins. One characteristic that separated Johnson from the more cinematic gangsters was the way he blended public works and patronage into his power. During his tenure, the city invested in projects that attracted conventions and visitors, like Convention Hall, which opened in 1929. Events and infrastructure made Atlantic City a national destination and increased the flow of money into the machine. At the same time, local newspapers and national journalists would publish exposés. Johnson was adept at surviving both praise and scandal because his influence ran deeper than any single headline. He ran an ecosystem where business owners, politicians, cops, and criminals all had stakes in keeping the city functioning and profitable. That network was his safeguard. Johnson's politics were also shrewd. He remained a Republican boss who delivered votes and services for constituents and his party. His dealings were transactional. He maintained relationships with state and federal officials, and he cultivated a public image as a civic leader who made Atlantic City thrive. To outsiders, he could be framed as a pragmatic mayoral power broker rather than a violent kingpin. Locals called him by his nickname, Nucky, which made him sound familiar rather than dangerous. That familiarity was itself a political advantage. It made the business of vice feel like a public policy choice rather than a criminal conspiracy. Still, Johnson's empire was not impregnable. By the late 1930s, federal investigators were watching Atlantic City more closely. Investigations into illegal lotteries, prostitution rings, and bootlegging connected the dots back to the political machine. Newspapers, especially those run by powerful publishers, helped put the pressure on Washington to act. The Internal Revenue Service began to investigate his finances. Countless prosecutions of subordinate operators and chances for witnesses to talk created the legal pathways that eventually led to Johnson. Prosecutors turned to tax law, a common tool against well-connected figures whose direct criminal transactions were hard to prove. After a series of trials, Johnson was convicted on charges of tax evasion in 1941. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison and fined. He entered Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary that August. The conviction did not result from any flashy shootout or a dramatic betrayal. It arose from the slow, meticulous work of investigators and prosecutors who translated the machine's financial flows into a case that federal courts could enforce. The sentence signaled that even deeply rooted local power could be undermined when national agencies and media attention aligned. Johnson served time, was paroled in 1945, and thereafter lived a quieter life, working for a time as a salesman and maintaining a level of influence in local politics, though never on the scale he had before the conviction. The measure of Johnson's importance is not only legal or criminal. He reshaped a city's economy and culture in ways that lasted for generations. His model showed how a local boss could turn vice into tourism, and how that transformation could sustain an entire municipal budget. His Atlantic City was a prototype for cities where vice was organized, taxed by the machine, and folded into the public life. It is also why his story resisted clean moral narratives. He was neither a straightforward philanthropist nor a public enemy. He funded civic projects and made the city prosper in certain ways. He also presided over exploitation and a system that relied on the suffering of those at the bottom of the vice economy. The coexistence of civic development and organized corruption is central to understanding his legacy. In the decades after Prohibition and after his imprisonment, Johnson's life became a blueprint for dramatization and adaptation. HBO's Boardwalk Empire took core elements of his career and reshaped them into a fictional character named Nucky Thompson. The show emphasized violence and larger-than-life rivalry because drama demands it. Historians note important differences between the man and the television figure. The real Nucky was less about personal violence and more about political brokerage, steady extraction of rents, and municipal management of vice. The show introduced murders and a level of national gangster warfare that do not fit the historical record. Still, the popularity of the fictional story revived interest in the actual man and prompted new examinations of how cities and criminal entrepreneurs coexisted in the early 20th century. What remains surprising about Enoch Johnson is how ordinary his toolkit looked when you strip away the myth. He used job appointments, records, business licenses, policing priorities, and the daily functioning of local government to build an economy that paid him and his allies. This was not raw lawlessness. It was organized governance that assigned value to illegal activity and then found ways to stabilize and profit from it. That approach explains why Atlantic City could be both scandalous and successful for a long time. It also explains why Johnson outlasted many more violent actors whose empires depended on muscle rather than systems. Today, his name lingers in two forms: as a historical figure who mastered the political art of municipal control, and as a cultural symbol reshaped by fiction. The lessons from his life are uncomfortable and practical. Power often looks bureaucratic and pedestrian. It works through records, appointments, and routines. When those mechanisms are used to manage vice, they can build prosperity for some and impose harm on others. Understanding Enoch Nucky Johnson means seeing how corruption and civic entrepreneurship can be two sides of the same coin, and how a town set on pleasure can be both sustained and hollowed out by the hands that manage it. If you want primary documents or a tighter timeline of the trials, sentences, and key municipal projects to attach to this narrative, I can pull together a sourced chronology and a short list of reliable books and archives that historians use on Johnson and Atlantic City.